Darkness settles across a world so cold that your breath doesn't just miss the air. It freezes instantly, turning into tiny crystals that drift downward like shattered stars. The temperature has collapsed to nearly 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The wind tears across the open steppe with a shrill, almost living voice, something that feels aware, restless, maybe even hungry. And the night ahead isn't the familiar 8 or 10 hours we know today. It stretches for 18, maybe 20 hours, a long, unbroken wall of cold blackness. This isn't a nightmare. This was an ordinary evening, 30,000 years ago, somewhere on the vast Eurasian steppe. And somehow, against all reason, human beings didn't just endure it. They flourished. They raised families. They made art. They shared stories around flickering firelight. They laughed and argued and built the cultural foundations that would one day spread across the planet. Tonight, we're going to walk through those nights as they truly were, not the polished versions recreated in museums, but the raw reality: smoke-thick shelters, empty stomachs, shadows that hid predators, and the crushing psychological weight of darkness that seemed endless. And we'll look at the brilliant, desperate, and ingenious solutions our ancestors invented to stay alive in a world that felt determined to erase them. So settle in. Let everything around you fade for a moment. We're stepping into a time when night wasn't merely the absence of daylight. It was a trial of the human spirit. To begin, we need to understand the world that Ice Age night fell upon, because the planet during the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, was nothing like the Earth we know. Enormous ice sheets, sometimes 2 miles thick, covered huge stretches of North America, Europe, and Asia. But the danger wasn't the ice itself. It was the chain reaction the ice created. So much water was locked inside those glaciers that global sea levels dropped nearly 400 feet. Coastlines stretched far beyond their modern boundaries. Entire continental shelves rose above the waves. Land bridges connected regions that today are separated by oceans: Asia to North America across Beringia, Britain to the continent, and Southeast Asia linked in one continuous landmass. The world was bigger, stranger, and far more connected. But with so much water frozen, the atmosphere became brutally dry. Very little moisture meant very few clouds. And when sunset came, there was nothing, not a single soft layer of vapor to trap even a hint of warmth. Temperatures could plunge 40 or 50 degrees in the span of an hour. The soil itself radiated cold that felt almost alive, draining heat from anything touching it. And the landscape was alien. Picture endless grassland rolling toward every horizon, not thick, green fields like modern prairies, but the tough, frost-resistant vegetation known as the mammoth steppe. Hardy grasses, sedges, and herbs, capable of surviving months without sunlight and temperatures that would destroy modern plants almost instantly. This world supported vast herds of Ice Age giants, woolly mammoths wrapped in heavy underwool, shaggy rhinoceroses, steppe bison, prehistoric horses, reindeer, cave bears, and the now extinct Eurasian cave lion. These enormous animals were built for cold the way desert creatures are built for heat. But when darkness fell, everything changed. The same animals humans relied on became unpredictable shapes moving through shadows. Predators, cave lions, dire wolves, enormous bears, emerged with senses far superior to anything humans possessed. Their eyes pierced the night. Ours did not. The temperature dropped so violently that skin left uncovered could freeze within minutes. And the darkness itself. Modern people rarely experience anything close to it. There were no city glows on the horizon, no distant headlights, no artificial light at all. On a cloudy night, you literally wouldn't be able to see your own hand an inch from your face. The darkness felt like something solid, pressing into you, swallowing the world whole. And still, humans adapted. They didn't simply hide in caves waiting for sunrise. They fought the dark. They made fire, crafted insulation, built shelters from bone and hide, and carved out spaces of warmth and safety where nature offered none. They learned how to negotiate with the night, never fully defeating it, but never surrendering. It's important to remember that Ice Age nights weren't the same everywhere. Near the equator, even at the height of the glaciation, nights stayed around 12 hours. But farther north, where many human groups lived, winter nights stretched unbelievably long. In what is now northern Europe or Siberia, darkness could dominate 20 hours a day. In the far north, the sun might vanish entirely for weeks or even months. This wasn't just a physical challenge, it was psychological. Humans are creatures of daylight, wired to wake with the sun and sleep when it sets. But these long nights were too long to sleep through. People had to stay awake, productive, social, and mentally stable during endless hours of cold confinement, where venturing outside could be lethal. The wind added its own threat. During daylight hours, even the weak winter sun created a bit of warmth and generated predictable air currents. But at night, the heat difference between the icy ground and slightly warmer air made brutal, chaotic gusts. These weren't mild winter winds. These were screaming blasts strong enough to knock someone down, carrying razor-sharp ice crystals capable of cutting exposed skin. Leaving shelter during the night was a gamble with death. Even the ground became dangerous. A thin layer of thawed mud during the day froze into a glass-hard sheet after sunset. Walking was a struggle. Running was almost impossible. A fall on that frozen surface could easily break a limb, and an injury out here, in this world, was often a death sentence. The air itself changed when night settled in. The extreme cold compressed the atmosphere, giving sound a muted, almost padded quality. Voices didn't travel far. Familiar noises, the wind, the distant calls of animals, the snapping of ice, warped just enough to confuse your sense of distance and direction. This strange distortion made moving around in the dark even more dangerous than it already was. But the most haunting part of Ice Age nights wasn't the cold or the wind, it was the silence. Modern nights always carry some background noise, traffic humming, electronics buzzing, far-off engines, other people living their lives. Back then, winter nights were nearly void of sound. Animals were mostly still. The wind might blast through in violent gusts, but in the long spaces between, the world went utterly quiet. In that kind of silence, every small sound, a crack, a shuffle, a faint rustle, felt amplified, meaningful, and potentially life-threatening. This was the environment that returned every single evening, night after night, for thousands of years. And somehow, people didn't just push through it. They learned to control it. They adapted so well that these brutal nights became part of a rhythm they mastered. Shelter is where their brilliance truly becomes visible. When people picture Ice Age homes, they often imagine rough caves with a fire burning in the middle and everyone clustered around it. But the truth is far more impressive. These communities engineered living spaces with a level of understanding about insulation, airflow, and stability that rivals modern architectural principles. Some of the most remarkable examples are the mammoth bone dwellings found across Eastern Europe, especially in present-day Ukraine and Russia. These weren't crude huts thrown together for survival. They were carefully planned structures designed specifically to endure the longest, coldest nights on Earth. Construction often began by digging a circular pit, usually about 3 to 4 feet deep and 15 to 20 feet across. This wasn't guesswork. Digging below the frost line meant tapping into the Earth's natural insulation, helping stabilize the interior temperature. The soil removed from the pit was piled around the edges to form a raised berm, adding wind protection and increasing the thermal barrier. Then came the framework, crafted from massive mammoth bones, skulls, ribs, tusks, long bones, arranged in a dome-like shape. A single home might require the remains of 30 or 40 mammoths. Collecting, transporting, and positioning that amount of material took skill, planning, and a coordinated effort. These bones weren't stacked haphazardly. They were fitted together in carefully interlocking patterns that distributed weight evenly and created a strong, load-bearing skeleton. The covering over this frame was a layered insulation system far more advanced than people often imagine. Closest to the inside were animal hides, reindeer, horse, or mammoth, with the fur facing inward to trap warm air. Over that, builders laid moss, grasses, or other fibrous plants to add insulation and pull moisture away. The final outer layer was either more hides or thick turf blocks that offered weather protection and acted as thermal mass. And the engineering gets even smarter. These structures were intentionally not airtight. Small vents were built into the top or along the sides to allow smoke to escape and fresh air to flow in. These builders understood something crucial. A tightly sealed shelter was deadly. Without ventilation, smoke from the hearth would fill the space, and carbon monoxide could quietly poison everyone inside. They had mastered a principle that wouldn't be formally understood again for thousands of years. The entrances were cleverly designed too. Instead of simple doorways, most homes had long, low tunnels, sometimes stretching 10 or 15 feet. These served as wind buffers, preventing icy gusts from blowing directly into the living area. The tunnel also created a primitive airlock, keeping cold air trapped outside while warm air stayed inside. And because you had to crawl through it, no one could rush in holding a weapon, an early security feature against both predators and hostile humans. Inside, everything had purpose. The center was dominated by a hearth, not just a hole in the ground, but a carefully engineered heating system. Stones were placed around and beneath the fire to absorb warmth and release it slowly after the flames died. Some hearths even show clay linings, which kept heat focused and prevented fire from spreading through the structure. The floor surrounding the hearth was layered with grasses, moss, reeds, and small branches, forming a soft insulating surface that protected people from the freezing earth. Sleeping areas were often set on raised platforms along the walls, elevating families above the coldest air, which always settled near the ground. Storage spaces were built right into the architecture. Little alcoves, pockets, or pits carved into the walls held supplies. Their placement wasn't random. Items that needed to stay frozen, like meat, were kept near the entrance, or in deeper pits that extended below the frost line. Objects that had to remain dry were stored high up, away from ground moisture. These weren't simple shelters. They were highly engineered survival machines built with intention, knowledge, and an understanding of their environment that came from generation after generation, living in unforgiving darkness. Lighting was a constant struggle during those endless nights. The central fire helped, but it couldn't brighten the entire space. To solve that, Ice Age people created remarkably effective oil lamps, shallow stone bowls filled with melted animal fat, with wicks twisted from plants or moss. These lamps burned with a steady, surprisingly clean glow that lasted for hours, and when several were placed around the room, the interior became much brighter than you'd imagine for a world thousands of years from electricity. But mammoth bone dwellings weren't the only shelters our ancestors built. In regions where giant bones were scarce, people turned to whatever the land offered. Some groups built homes from wood, stone, or compacted blocks of earth. In Siberia, there is evidence of semi-underground houses dug into hillsides, supported by timber frames and topped with thick turf roofs. In present-day France and Spain, families took advantage of natural caves, modifying them with walls, partitions, and built up floors to create warmer, more efficient living areas. Some of the most clever shelters were temporary ones designed for hunts or seasonal travel. These lightweight structures could be set up fast, but still gave enough protection to survive a night or two in brutal weather. A frame of branches or antlers was covered with hides that could be rolled up and carried from place to place. These portable homes show that Ice Age people understood the basics of modular design, creating parts that could be reused in countless configurations depending on the terrain and the needs of the moment. Keeping any of these shelters functional took constant work. Animal hides had to be checked and repaired because the extreme shifts from day to night made them crack and stiffen. The hearth needed regular cleaning to keep smoke flowing upward instead of into the room. The entrance tunnel had to be cleared of snow after every storm, and the whole structure had to be watched for damage from wind pressure, heavy snow buildup, or the occasional curious animal. The most impressive thing about Ice Age architecture, though, was how adaptable it was. These weren't fixed, permanent houses the way we think of them today. They were designed to evolve. Families could expand them, reinforce the walls with additional layers, redirect the entrance to face away from a new wind pattern, or even dismantle parts of the structure and relocate if the area stopped providing enough resources. The valuable pieces, tools, hides, bones, were never wasted. Building these homes required more than skill. It demanded cooperation. One person couldn't construct a mammoth bone house alone. It took a coordinated team, sometimes entire extended families or small groups working together for days or weeks. This effort built connections, responsibilities, and trust, social ties that reached beyond bloodlines and became essential for survival in a world where you couldn't make it alone. And when night finally came, when the wind began to shriek and the temperature plunged, these shelters turned into something more than structures. They became pockets of warmth and safety carved out of a hostile world. They were the difference between surviving the night and not seeing the next morning, between the continuation of human culture and the possibility of extinction. Clothing was the next line of defense. A strong shelter wasn't enough. To survive Ice Age nights, people had to turn their bodies into walking insulation systems, and the clothing they made was far more advanced than the crude animal skins shown in movies. Everything began with layering. Modern hikers talk about base layers, insulation, and outer shells. Ice Age humans figured out that same strategy tens of thousands of years earlier. They knew that trapping air between layers was the secret to warmth, and that several thinner layers kept heat far better than one bulky piece. The innermost layer, resting directly on the skin, was made from soft leather or fine fur. It needed to feel comfortable, but more importantly, it had to pull moisture away. Sweat was deadly in sub-zero temperatures. If moisture stayed against the skin, it froze and drained body heat quickly. The base layer's entire job was to move that moisture outward so it could evaporate or be absorbed by the next layer. The insulating layer was where the real craftsmanship showed. People used fur from many different animals, each chosen for a specific advantage. Reindeer fur was ideal because every hair is hollow, creating countless tiny pockets of trapped air. Arctic fox fur was incredibly dense and soft. Mammoth fur offered incredible warmth when available, though it was heavy and difficult to work with. But they didn't simply throw hides over their shoulders. They treated the furs with oils and fats to keep them flexible and water-resistant. They scraped them to uniform thickness for consistent insulation, and they cut and stitched the pieces in ways that kept heat in and allowed the body to move freely. Their sewing tools were engineering achievements of their own. Bone and ivory needles were carved with incredible precision, some as thin as modern metal needles. Their thread was sinew, carefully prepared to be tough, slightly elastic, and able to handle extreme temperature shifts without snapping. Their stitches were so tight that many seams were nearly waterproof. The outermost layer was designed to block wind and shed snow or freezing rain. This usually came from the hides of large animals like bison, horses, or mammoths. These hides were smoked to preserve them and make them more water-resistant. Some garments were even coated with fat or oil to create a primitive waterproof shell. They understood how important it was to keep the wind from stealing heat. The small details showed how advanced their clothing truly was. Hoods were shaped to protect the face while still allowing the wearer to see to the sides. Sleeves were cut to allow full movement, but sealed tightly at the wrists. Hemlines were weighted or tied so the wind couldn't blow them upward. Every opening, neck, wrist, ankle, could be adjusted to help regulate body temperature. Footwear was one of the most complicated pieces of all. Ice Age boots were multi-layered systems built for survival. The inside layer was soft fur worn against the foot. The next layer was insulating material, dry grasses, moss, shredded bark, that could be swapped out if it got damp. The outer layer was tough hide, often with the hair left on for traction on ice. These systems turned the human body into a portable shelter, allowing people not only to move through the frozen world, but to hunt, build, travel, and thrive in places where unprotected skin could freeze solid in minutes. The soles of their footwear were remarkably clever. Some boots were built with wooden or bone pieces inside to insulate the feet from the frozen ground. Others had roughened bottoms, carved textures, or added strips of hide that worked like early traction systems on ice, and each pair was made roomy enough for thick foot wrappings, yet secure enough that they wouldn't slip off while moving or working. Keeping the hands warm was another major challenge. Mittens were the preferred choice because they allowed the fingers to share heat, but Ice Age mittens were far from simple sacks of fur. They were shaped carefully so people could still use their hands while keeping them warm. Some versions had separate spaces for fingers and the thumb, creating something halfway between a glove and a mitten. Others had small flaps that could fold open so the fingers could be exposed for detailed work, then covered again to trap heat. Head coverings were essential because the body loses a significant amount of heat through the head and face. People wore tight-fitting caps of leather or fur, often designed with ear flaps that tied beneath the chin. Some included built-in face coverings to shield the cheeks and nose from frostbite, and when conditions became brutal, they wrapped their entire head and face, leaving just a slit for their eyes. Clothing wasn't something you put on once and forgot about. It had to be constantly adjusted depending on how hard someone was working and how cold the environment became. When labor increased and body heat rose, people opened parts of their clothing or removed layers to avoid sweating. When activity stopped, especially while standing guard or resting, layers were added and every opening was sealed. This constant balancing act required discipline because one mistake could soak clothes with sweat that would later freeze. Caring for clothing was a job that never ended. Hides needed to be scraped clean, rubbed with oil so they wouldn't stiffen, and checked carefully for cracks or tears. Seams were reinforced and repaired. Fur needed brushing to keep it fluffy and insulating. These tasks weren't busy work, they were survival tasks, just as important as sharpening a spear or repairing a shelter. Dry clothing was a matter of life or death. Wet leather or fur loses its ability to keep heat in and can even pull warmth away from the body. To avoid this, Ice Age people developed reliable methods for drying garments in freezing weather. Clothes were hung near the fire but never close enough to scorch. Ice was beaten out of the fibers. Sometimes garments were buried in dry snow, which pulled moisture from the material like a primitive desiccant. And they understood that staying warm wasn't only about what you wore. They knew that eating high-calorie meals before heading into the cold helped the body maintain heat. They knew that movement created warmth, but overexertion caused sweat that could become dangerous. They also understood that alcohol, despite creating a brief feeling of warmth, actually increased heat loss and was risky in freezing conditions. None of this knowledge came from written notes. It was inherited wisdom, passed from elders to young people and sharpened through the hard lessons of those who got it wrong. In the Ice Age, clothing mistakes weren't inconveniences. They were deadly. Fire was the technology that made all other survival strategies possible. Without fire, a single winter night would have been impossible to endure. But keeping a fire alive in brutal cold, with limited materials and endless darkness, was one of humanity's most demanding tasks. Fuel was the first challenge. In many Ice Age landscapes, wood barely existed. The mammoth steppe was nearly treeless, broken only by low shrubs and tiny willows, so they used what they had. They burned bones, especially mammoth bones, which were dense and burned for long periods. They also burned dried herbivore dung, which, when properly prepared, made surprisingly effective fuel, and they used animal fat, which burned with intense heat but required careful tending so it wouldn't flare dangerously. Starting a fire from nothing was a difficult, time-consuming skill. Friction methods required rubbing a stick against a board until an ember formed. Percussion methods involved striking flint against pyrite to throw sparks. Both demanded dry materials, strong hands, and patience. For this reason, a working fire was almost never allowed to die. Before people slept, they banked the fire. Hot coals were gathered together and then covered lightly with ash to slow their burn. The ash insulated the embers and kept them alive until morning. At dawn, the ash was brushed away, new fuel added, and the fire leapt back to life. With proper technique, a banked fire could last between 12 and 18 hours unattended. But banking a fire was an art. Too much ash smothered it. Too little allowed it to burn out. Fuel pieces had to be arranged to burn slow, with just the right amount of air. And through the night, Someone always checked the fire, adding fuel, adjusting the coals, and making sure the flame never died. The design of the hearth itself mattered. People arranged stones to reflect heat into the living space and to create a natural draft that pulled air through the flames. Some hearths were lined with clay, which absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. Others included channels that guided smoke toward an opening while trapping warmth inside. Fire did far more than provide warmth. It gave light, something psychologically vital during endless dark nights. The flickering glow created moving shadows, giving the camp a sense of life and presence. It allowed people to see one another's expressions and maintain social bonds, something crucial for emotional well-being. Fire also protected them. Most predators avoided flames and stayed away from lit shelters. A fire created a safe boundary around a camp and produced smoke that could be used for signaling or marking territory. Cooking transformed their diet. Raw meat is hard to digest and often dangerous. Cooked meat provided more usable calories and helped kill parasites. Fire also softened roots and fibrous plants, expanding the range of edible foods. Even preserved foods tasted better when warmed. Social life revolved around the hearth. People sat around the flames to eat, talk, craft tools, and tell stories. The fire created a shared center of life, strengthening relationships and providing comfort. In long stretches of winter darkness, this connection was as necessary as warmth. But fire was also a potential disaster. Shelters were made from hides, wood, and other flammable materials. A stray spark could destroy everything, so strict fire safety rules were universal. Children were taught early to respect the flames. Adults took shifts ensuring nothing got out of control, and shelter designs always included some form of ventilation to manage smoke, which could accumulate dangerously if ignored. Different fires served different purposes. Large, hot fires were for cooking or for intense warmth. Smaller, smokier fires preserved meat and hides. Tiny, carefully managed fires lit the space without overheating it. People understood these differences and built exactly the fire each moment required. The psychological weight of fire can't be overstated. In the endless black of an Ice Age night, fire wasn't just a tool. It was a declaration, a symbol of human defiance. Proof that in the coldest, most hostile environment imaginable, humans could create warmth and light. As long as the fire lived, so did they. Food was another constant struggle, because surviving those nights demanded massive amounts of energy. The human body burns calories non-stop to keep itself warm, and in severe cold, the demand skyrockets. Ice Age. People needed between 4,000 and 6,000 calories every day, twice the needs of a modern sedentary adult. Fat was the foundation of their diet. Not lean meat, not plants. Fat. Pure, dense energy. Fat delivers more than double the calories per gram compared to protein or carbohydrates, and it burns slowly, offering long-lasting heat and fuel, vital during freezing nights. Large animals provided most of this fat. A single mammoth could supply an enormous amount of meat and fat, enough to feed an entire group for weeks or months. But mammoths were dangerous and not always around. So people also hunted horses, bison, reindeer, and other big herbivores, each one offering precious fat and protein. And they didn't limit themselves to muscle meat. They made use of every part of an animal: organs, marrow, brain, tongue, even the half-digested plants inside the stomach. Organ meat was packed with nutrients that muscle meat lacked. Bone marrow was almost entirely fat, delivering huge amounts of energy in a small portion. And the plant matter found in an herbivore's stomach offered vitamins and fiber that were otherwise difficult to come by. Their methods of preparing food were far more advanced than many people imagine. Fresh meat was eaten immediately after a successful hunt because it carried the most flavor and nutrition, but most of the kill had to be saved for later. Ice Age communities developed several preservation strategies suited to different seasons and needs. Freezing was the easiest option. In winter, meat could be hung outdoors and become rock hard within hours, staying edible for months. But freezing only worked in the coldest seasons and required protection from predators and scavengers. So people often dug pits into the permafrost, creating natural underground freezers that stayed cold all year. Drying was another reliable method. Thin slices of meat were hung in the frigid, dry air until they lost moisture and became tough and lightweight. This dried meat could be stored for years, eaten as is, or softened again in hot water or broth. Smoking combined drying with the preservative qualities of smoke. Meat was suspended above a smoky fire for days or even weeks, absorbing antimicrobial compounds while slowly drying out. Smoked meat developed a distinctive flavor and had a long shelf life. Fermentation was a more sophisticated process. Meat was buried or stored in sealed containers, allowing natural bacteria to break down fats and proteins. The result had a strong smell and taste, but it was highly nutritious and could last for months. Fat was preserved separately. Hunters melted down animal fat, strained it, and stored it in containers made from stomachs or bladders. The rendered fat could be eaten on its own, used for frying, or mixed with dried meat to create a dense survival food similar to pemmican, something that could last for years and deliver enormous calories when needed most. But their diet wasn't entirely meat-based. When the season allowed, they gathered plant foods as well. Roots and tubers provided energy and fiber, even when pried from frozen ground. Nuts and seeds offered additional fats and minerals. Berries could be dried or packed in fat, turning them into sweet, long-lasting snacks that also supplied vitamin C. Meals were timed with purpose. A large portion was usually eaten at night before the coldest hours. This supplied the body with the calories needed to keep its temperature up through long periods of darkness. Digestion itself created warmth, and going to sleep with a full belly brought comfort as well as psychological reassurance. Eating wasn't only about feeding the body, it strengthened relationships. Mealtimes were community moments. People gathered around a fire, shared food, told stories, and reinforced the unity necessary for survival. Sharing food created bonds, obligations, and a sense of mutual care. Food distribution followed rules. Hunters who made the kill received the finest cuts, but everyone was given a portion. Extra was always set aside for children, pregnant women, and elders. No one went hungry if food was available. In an Ice Age community, starvation wasn't viewed as an individual failure. It meant the whole group had broken down. Protecting stored food was a constant responsibility. Meat and fat had to be kept safe from animals and, occasionally, other humans. Storage sites were guarded, and stealing food was one of the gravest offenses imaginable. Losing preserved food could doom an entire group. Preparing food was also a communal task. Women generally led in butchering, preserving, and cooking, though men helped when strength or specialized skills were required. Children learned these techniques from a young age, ensuring that every generation understood how to process and preserve food. Their cooking methods were varied and creative. Meat could be roasted over open flame, boiled in water heated by dropping in glowing stones, or baked in earth ovens lined with hot coals. Each method produced different textures and flavors, and they knew exactly which technique to use depending on the cut and the meal. Bone broth was a constant in their diet. Bones were simmered for long periods, sometimes for days, until every bit of nutrition was pulled out: minerals, collagen, fat, and flavor. It was a warm, sustaining food that helped stretch resources and kept people nourished during the coldest parts of the year. The broth they made was thick, warming, and full of nourishment, perfect for bitter, freezing nights. People could drink it on its own or use it as a base for other meals, but food offered more than calories. A good meal brought comfort, pleasure, and a sense of normalcy in a world that was anything but normal. The tastes, textures, and smells awakened the senses, and eating together strengthened the social bonds that kept their communities alive. There's another part of Ice Age life that rarely gets talked about: the psychological struggle of those endless winter nights. Today, many people suffer from seasonal depression after just a few months of shorter days. Now imagine nights lasting 18 to 20 hours, day after day, for months on end. The emotional weight was enormous, and Ice Age people developed surprisingly advanced ways to protect their mental well-being. The first method was routine. Even without sunlight to mark time, communities followed strict schedules. They woke, ate, worked, and slept at consistent hours. That regularity created stability and control in an environment that could easily feel chaotic or disorienting. But routine wasn't enough on its own. They also understood how important light was for the human mind. The central fire was never allowed to die completely. Its constant glow offered warmth and psychological comfort. Oil lamps burned throughout the night, even though fuel was hard to find, because the benefits were worth the cost. Social connection was another lifeline. Long nights were filled with gatherings, storytelling, singing, games, and craftwork. These weren't just distractions. They were intentional ways of keeping people emotionally anchored and preventing the isolation that could lead to despair. Storytelling held a special place. Tales passed down through generations were shared during the darkest months. They preserved cultural memory, entertained listeners, and created a shared sense of belonging, making everyone feel connected to something larger than themselves. Music played the same role. People crafted flutes, drums, and rattles out of bone, wood, and hide. Music lifted spirits, expressed the emotions of the group, and brought people closer together. Making music together was its own form of therapy. Games kept minds sharp. Archaeology shows they played strategy games, chance-based games, and challenges that filled the months when going outside was dangerous or impossible. These games offered stimulation, friendly competition, and a sense of victory in a season that offered few. Crafts also mattered. People carved bone and ivory, wove baskets, decorated their tools, and created beads. These quiet activities provided a sense of accomplishment and beauty that broke the monotony and helped fight helplessness. Making something new, something useful or beautiful, gave purpose. Physical activity didn't stop either. Indoors, people stretched, danced, sparred, and moved constantly to stay warm and keep their bodies strong. These activities also released endorphins, improving mood and reducing stress. But they also understood the value of quiet moments. Not every hour had to be filled. People set aside time for meditation, prayer, or simply sitting by the fire in thought. Balancing social time with solitude helped them stay emotionally balanced. Their sleep patterns were nothing like ours today. Instead of one long block of sleep, they slept in segments, resting for a few hours, waking for quiet activities, then sleeping again. This two-part sleep cycle fit naturally into the long winter nights and helped prevent the exhaustion and sluggishness that seasonal depression can cause. Diet played a role too. Their high-fat foods fueled the brain, and omega-3s from fish and game helped regulate mood. They also ate fermented foods that supported gut health, and today we know gut health is closely tied to mental health. Communities took care of their own. Mental struggles weren't viewed as weakness. If someone was suffering, the group supported them with companionship, help, and understanding. This collective responsibility helped protect everyone. Spiritual life was a major source of strength. Rituals marked the passage of time, celebrated important events, and connected people to nature and the divine. These beliefs helped them find meaning in hardship and cling to hope during the darkest months. Their attitude toward darkness itself was powerful. They didn't treat it as an enemy. Darkness was part of the natural cycle, a period of rest, reflection, and preparation for the return of light. Accepting the rhythm of nature instead of resisting it was one of their greatest psychological strengths. Children were taught early to be resilient, to handle discomfort, and to find courage in hardship. This wasn't cruelty. It was survival training for a world where mental toughness could decide life or death. Stories, teachings, and songs all carried the message that humans could endure anything if they stayed strong, stood together, and held on to hope. Now let's look at the tools and technologies that made their survival possible. Ice Age people weren't primitive. They were skilled engineers who created tools perfectly adapted for long, cold, and dark environments. The hand axe was the foundation. It was used for chopping, cutting, scraping, even pounding. But these weren't crude stones. Many were shaped with precision, balanced carefully, and made from flint or obsidian, which can reach sharpness beyond modern steel. But hand axes were just the start. They made scrapers for hides, burins for carving bone and antler, awls for piercing leather, needles for sewing clothing, all crafted with specific tasks in mind. The level of craftsmanship was astonishing. To create these tools, people had deep knowledge of materials. Flint knapping, the art of shaping stone, was a skill learned over years. A skilled napper could see the tool hidden inside a raw stone and carefully chip away flakes until it emerged. They used bone and antler just as expertly. Bone needles, awls, and points were common, and antler tools were used to remove tiny flakes from stone to create extremely fine edges. Wood was used for handles, spears, bowls, and utensils, though it rarely survives today. Every piece of wood was selected and shaped to last. Cordage, rope, string, and twisted fiber was another essential technology. People made it from plant fibers, strips of hide or animal sinew, and it served countless purposes: sewing, binding tools together, making nets, and setting snares. Producing cordage meant gathering raw materials, processing them carefully, twisting or braiding them into strong, flexible strands, and treating them so they wouldn't decay over time. Containers were equally vital for holding food, water, and supplies. Ice Age communities crafted them from many different materials: bags made from hide, baskets woven from plants, bowls carved from wood, and even containers fashioned from the stomachs or bladders of animals. Each type had its own strengths and was used for specific tasks. Weapons, of course, were crucial for hunting and protection. Spears were the main weapon, fitted with stone or bone points, secured to wooden shafts. Many groups also invented spear throwers, tools that extended the arm and allowed a spear to be launched with far more force and accuracy. Some communities used bows and arrows as well, though these were less common in the coldest regions. Traps and snares played a huge role. They allowed people to catch animals without constantly tracking them, freeing up time for other work. Designs ranged from simple cordage loops to heavy deadfalls capable of killing large animals. Setting these traps in the right places required careful observation of animal behavior, trails, and seasonal movement patterns. But one of the most important survival tools for those long, freezing nights was the oil lamp. These simple devices, a shallow stone bowl filled with animal fat and a wick made from moss or plant fibers, provided steady light for hours. The long winter nights also became a natural classroom. Children learned skills by watching their parents and the other adults around them. Young hunters practiced tracking and the techniques they would eventually rely on, and everyone, no matter their age, absorbed the stories, songs, and traditions that held their community together. Passing knowledge from one generation to the next was essential for keeping their culture alive and making sure no important skill disappeared. We also have to look at the spiritual and mythological side of Ice Age nights, because the way people understood darkness shaped how they lived through it. They didn't see night as just the absence of daylight. They believed it was a realm filled with its own forces, spirits, and meanings. To them, the dark wasn't empty. It was alive. Animals, plants, rivers, stones, mountains, everything had a spirit, and those spirits were most active at night. Darkness was the moment when the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual one thinned. It was the time when people could reach out to the unseen, when dreams and visions carried special weight. The night sky held deep importance. The stars weren't simply lights overhead, they were ancestors, deities, and markers that mapped out the structure of the universe. People of the Ice Age watched the stars closely, tracking their movements for navigation and for keeping time. And the long hours of darkness in winter gave them the perfect conditions to study the sky. The moon mattered most of all. Its cycle shaped the way people measured time, and its glow was often the only natural light during the darkest nights. Many of their rituals followed the phases of the moon, and lunar patterns helped them plan their activities through the seasons. But night wasn't only sacred, it was also dangerous. They believed harmful spirits roamed in the dark, so protection was necessary. Fires were kept burning not just for warmth, but as a spiritual shield. Certain symbols or objects were placed at shelter entrances to keep unwelcome forces away, and rituals were performed to guard against anything threatening that might move through the night. Dreams were taken extremely seriously. The long nights meant long hours of dreaming, and these dreams were considered messages from the spirit world. A dream about animals might predict a good hunt. Dreams of ancestors could give advice or warnings. Interpreting dreams was a respected skill, and people with a gift for it held influence and authority. Shamans were central to spiritual life. They were believed to communicate directly with the spirit world, heal sickness, foresee danger, and guide the community through spiritual challenges. Many of their practices involved entering altered states of consciousness through fasting, rhythmic drumming, dancing, or using psychoactive plants. The deep darkness of winter made these rituals even more powerful. Ceremonies often lasted through the entire night, with chanting and drumming continuing until sunrise. Cave art may also have been part of this spiritual practice. Many painted caves show signs that rituals were performed inside them, and some researchers believe the artwork itself was a kind of spiritual communication, an attempt to connect with or capture the essence of the animals depicted. Death and the afterlife were strongly associated with night as well. People believed that the dead traveled to an underworld, a dark realm beneath the surface of the earth. Burials often placed bodies in a fetal position, symbolizing rebirth, and grave goods, tools, ornaments, food, were included to help the deceased in the next world. But darkness wasn't only about fear or danger. It was also tied to renewal and transformation. Just as the earth rested in winter before spring returned, people used the dark months to rest, heal, and prepare. Darkness had a purpose. It was part of the natural order. Important rituals marked the shifting balance of light and dark. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, was especially meaningful. It marked the moment when the days would finally begin to lengthen. Ceremonies celebrated this turning point, offering hope and reminding everyone that light would return. Stories told during these long nights carried spiritual and moral lessons. They explained how the world came to be, how the spirits behaved, and how people were supposed to live. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were instruction manuals for survival, teaching values and behavior essential for the community. Understanding night in a spiritual way also helped people cope emotionally. Darkness wasn't random or meaningless. It fit into a larger cosmic pattern. Spirits weren't unpredictable. They could be understood and respected. This gave people a sense of control and comfort during the most challenging parts of winter. Now let's talk about health and medicine. Because surviving Ice Age nights meant managing all kinds of medical problems. They didn't have modern medicine, but they developed surprisingly advanced knowledge about healing, treating injuries, and preventing disease. Frostbite was a constant risk during long stretches of freezing weather. People understood that frostbite happened when tissue froze, and they recognized the early signs: pale or grey skin, numbness, and hardness in the affected area. Their treatment methods were effective: slow, gentle rewarming rather than sudden heating, which could cause more damage. They also knew not to rub frostbitten skin, a mistake that could make the injury worse. For serious cases, they used plant-based poultices with anti-inflammatory properties. Honey was used when available to help prevent infection. Skilled healers would sometimes lance blisters and drain them, a delicate procedure requiring experience. Hypothermia was another major danger. People recognized symptoms like uncontrollable shivering, confusion, slurred speech, and clumsy movements. Treatment focused on warming the person gradually, using shared body heat, warm liquids, and careful placement near the fire. They understood that warming someone too quickly could cause shock. Respiratory illnesses were common during winter, when families crowded together in shelters with limited ventilation. Steam inhalation was used to ease congestion, often with added herbs. Honey-based syrups and herbal remedies helped soothe coughs and sore throats. Their ability to treat injuries was impressive. Broken bones were set and splintered, wounds were cleaned and bandaged with surprising care. Even without knowing about bacteria, they understood that cleanliness mattered. They used plants with antimicrobial properties and recognized that different injuries healed differently. They also had ways to manage pain. Plants with natural analgesic properties were used, and willow bark, containing compounds similar to modern aspirin, was likely part of their medicine. They used cold to reduce swelling and numb pain, applying snow or ice when needed. Childbirth during winter nights demanded experienced midwives who understood how to manage labor, pain, and complications. Herbal remedies, massage, and repositioning helped ease delivery. The warm, controlled environment inside the shelter was actually helpful for birth. But infant mortality was high, especially in winter. To protect newborns from the cold, babies were kept close to their mothers, wrapped in soft furs, and often slept right beside the fire. Frequent breastfeeding provided warmth as well as nutrition. The elders in the community required extra care too. They were more vulnerable to cold and sickness, so they were given the warmest places in the shelter, the best food, and constant attention. This care wasn't only kindness, it was recognition of the elders' irreplaceable knowledge and wisdom. Mental health wasn't ignored either. People understood that long dark winters could take a psychological toll. They relied on social connection, shared activities, storytelling, and steady light from fires and lamps to keep spirits up. Community support was essential, and no one was left alone to suffer. Nutrition was also understood in practical ways. People knew that certain foods prevented sickness, even without knowing the science. Organ meats provided vitamins that prevented deficiency diseases, and high-fat foods fueled the body's ability to stay warm, fight illness, and heal. Hygiene, although different from modern standards, was taken seriously. People bathed when possible, using warmed water or even snow. They cleaned shelters, removed waste, and refreshed bedding. They knew that cleanliness supported health. They also isolated the sick when possible, moving ill individuals to separate parts of the shelter or to a different shelter entirely to prevent disease from spreading. This wasn't abandonment. People still cared for the sick, but contact was limited to prevent disease from spreading. Their knowledge of herbal medicine was extensive, built through generations of careful observation and experimentation. They understood which plants eased pain, which fought infection, which soothed the stomach, and which cleared the lungs, each remedy chosen with purpose. Healing wasn't only physical, though. Shamans and healers blended plant medicine with prayer, ritual, and ceremony, addressing body and spirit together. This holistic approach often made treatments more effective than relying on physical remedies alone. Now let's talk about the social and political systems that kept Ice Age groups functioning during those endless dark months. Surviving in such brutal conditions required cooperation, and cooperation depended on structure, leadership, and fair ways to settle conflicts. Most Ice Age communities were small, maybe 20 to 50 people, usually composed of extended families tied together by long-standing obligations and relationships. These weren't casual groups. They were tightly knit units where every person mattered and every person was needed. Leadership wasn't inherited. It was earned. The most capable hunter, the most skilled craftsperson, the elder with the most hard-won wisdom, these were the people others turned to. But leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. Leaders were expected to provide for the group, to make sound decisions, and to place the community's well-being above their own desires. Decisions were usually made as a group. Big choices, where to hunt, when to move, how to resolve disputes, were openly discussed by everyone or by a council of respected voices. This way, every person could be heard, and the final decision reflected a shared commitment. But winter nights strained these systems. Being confined together for months with limited food and constant stress could ignite conflict over almost anything: food portions, hurt feelings, relationship issues. To keep peace, Ice Age people developed thoughtful methods of conflict resolution. Talking came first. Disagreements were aired publicly, with each person presenting their side while the community listened and helped mediate. The goal was harmony, not victory. If talking didn't settle things, they turned to other practices: compensation for wrongdoing, public shaming for minor offenses, or, in extreme cases, expulsion from the group, a punishment that could mean death in winter conditions. Resource sharing followed clear rules to avoid jealousy or resentment. Hunters earned the best cuts, but no one was left hungry. Those who contributed more received slightly more, but not so much that it created division. Women carried enormous responsibility, managing food, hides, clothing, childcare, and daily life. But they also participated in decision-making, and in some groups, women served as spiritual or political leaders. Children played an active role too. They weren't waiting to become useful someday. They already helped gather wood, process food, and care for younger kids. They were the future of the group, so their training and safety were treated as essential. Elders held revered positions. Their memories, their skills, their stories, their guidance, these were priceless. They taught, mediated conflicts, and preserved traditions through storytelling. No community survived alone. Alliances through trade, mutual aid, and intermarriage created a wider network of support. These bonds were strengthened during winter visits, when groups stayed with one another for days or weeks, exchanging goods, stories, songs, and news. Marriages weren't just personal commitments, they were political bridges linking distant families and ensuring cooperation across generations. Rituals and ceremonies helped maintain unity. Participating together in shared spiritual events reinforced identity and purpose. Winter nights, long and slow, provided plenty of time for these ceremonies, some lasting for entire nights. Justice was quick and communal. There were no courts, no trials. The group discussed an offense, whether theft, violence, or breaking a taboo, and decided together on a response aimed at restoring balance instead of revenge. Ownership looked different from today. Personal items belonged to individuals, but food, shelter, and land were communal. No one hoarded while others struggled. In a small group, reputation was everything. Generosity, skills, reliability, these earned respect. Selfishness or deceit could destroy someone's standing and threaten their survival. These systems weren't just survival strategies, they became the seeds of later human civilization. Cooperation, leadership, conflict resolution, all of these traditions carried forward as humans spread across the planet and built complex societies. Now let's explore how Ice Age nights shaped human evolution, culture, and psychology, effects that still live inside us today. The first legacy is adaptability. Humans didn't survive the Ice Age because our bodies evolved for the cold. We survived because our minds and cultures adapted. Our creativity, problem-solving, and ability to innovate became defining traits. The social closeness forced by winter also left a lasting imprint. Humans are deeply social, and our craving for community, cooperation, shared meals, and shared stories has deep Ice Age roots. The long nights of gathering around a fire, telling stories, and relying on one another shaped how we relate today. Our reactions to darkness also come from this era. Many people still feel uneasy in complete darkness, a once useful instinct when predators and spirits were believed to roam at night. Our desire for light, our need for illuminated spaces, our comfort around fires or lamps, these echo Ice Age survival strategies. Storytelling as a cornerstone of human life began during those winters. The tales told in caves and shelters became the ancestors of all later myths, books, movies, and oral traditions. Fire became more than a tool. It became a symbol of safety, community, and power. Even today, humans instinctively gather around flames or light as if returning to something ancient. Technologies developed during this era, stone tools, hide clothing, shelter building, food preservation, laid the foundation for future innovation. Ice Age skills even allowed humans to migrate into places once too cold to inhabit, eventually populating northern Europe, Siberia, and the Americas. Genetically, the Ice Age left its mark too. Different populations developed adaptations to their environments, some still visible today in traits like skin tone or metabolism. Psychologically, traits like patience, resilience, long-term thinking, and the ability to hope during hardship were essential for winter survival and remain vital human strengths today. Ice Age art shows how fully developed our aesthetic sense already was. Paintings, carvings, decorated tools, all created in harsh conditions, proving that humans seek beauty even when life is difficult. Our relationship with nature, both practical and spiritual, was shaped by this era as well. Modern attempts to reconnect with nature reflect a longing for that older relationship. The Ice Age also taught that survival depends on community. No one lasted alone. People shared food, knowledge, shelter, and responsibilities. This truth still matters in a world facing global challenges. Above all, the Ice Age revealed human resilience. Our ancestors endured conditions that seem impossible today, yet they didn't just survive, they thrived. They raised families, made art, created culture, built alliances, and found meaning. They proved that humans can overcome almost anything when we work together. Their innovations, their bonds, their spiritual practices, all of these shaped humanity. We are the descendants of people who survived the unimaginable, and we carry their determination and adaptability. As our journey through Ice Age nights comes to a close, we've seen how humans transformed a deadly environment into a livable one. Their shelters, clothing, tools, foods, psychological strategies, social systems, and spiritual beliefs were incredibly advanced. But the real lesson isn't in any single invention, it's in the spirit behind them. Ice Age nights were long and brutal. Darkness lasted most of the day. A moment of exposure could freeze a person in minutes. Isolation was deep. Yet humans didn't simply endure. They adapted creatively, socially, emotionally. They made light in the darkness with fire and lamps. They made warmth against the cold with layered clothing and smart shelter design. They made closeness out of isolation through music, stories, and shared work. They turned danger into opportunity, using long nights to craft tools, teach children, and strengthen traditions. They didn't see themselves as victims of their environment. They reshaped their world to fit their needs. And these lessons still matter. Our challenges today are different: environmental, social, psychological. But the Ice Age shows what humans are capable of when innovation, cooperation, and resilience come together. Ice Age people weren't superhuman. They were parents protecting their kids, elders sharing lifelong knowledge, young people learning how to contribute, and communities that understood survival was a shared responsibility. They didn't have modern technology. They didn't have global supply chains. They didn't have medical systems or backup plans. They had each other, their skill, their courage, and their ingenuity, and it was enough. Every time you flip on a light in the dark, you echo their fires. Every time you put on layered clothes, you use techniques they perfected. Every time you sit with people you care about, sharing food and stories, you follow traditions born in Ice Age shelters. The Ice Age tested everything that makes us human: intelligence, creativity, community, resilience, hope. And we passed that test, not barely, but with strength. We didn't simply survive, we flourished. The darkness taught us to create light. The cold taught us to make warmth. Isolation taught us the meaning of togetherness. Hardship taught us how powerful we become when we refuse to give up. That is the true story of how humans conquered the Ice Age. Not with one invention, but with a complete reimagining of human capability. We didn't just adapt to the Ice Age, we mastered it. And because of that, we became the species that would one day spread across the entire planet. And on the coldest nights, when the wind roars and the dark feels heavy, remember this: humans have survived far worse than anything most of us will ever face. We are the children of survivors, of innovators, of people who held on even when the odds were impossible. The Ice Age nights are long gone, but their legacy lives in our adaptability.